Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Search Off the Record podcast. Our plan for this series is to talk a bit about what's happening at Google Search, how things work behind the scenes, and who knows, maybe have some fun along the way. My name is John Mueller. I'm a search advocate on the search relations team here at Google in Switzerland, and I'm joined for this episode by Martin and Gary, who are also on the search relations team. Hi, guys.
Hi, John.
Guten Tag, meine Damen und Herren.
Woohoo! So cool to have you two here again, which is kind of like every podcast, I guess. But anyway, I looked at the notes and I saw we've done a bit over 20 of these episodes so far, which is pretty cool. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm very happy to see that this is working out well and that people enjoy listening to these as much as we enjoy recording these, I think. Except Gary. I think Gary doesn't enjoy this.
No.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay, fine.
He doesn't like nice things. That's the problem.
No.
So how should we celebrate the 21st episode of the podcast? What do people do?
With a big gathering.
We could cut this short.
Cut it short. No, never.
Why? Oh, Gary, come on. Don't be such a party pooper.
So what were your favorite parts so far in the series?
Yeah, Gary. What were they?
I really like the endings of the recordings.
Because you speak in a different language every time?
No, because they end.
Oh,
yeah.
Christ. I actually really enjoy your journey taking us through, search from beginning to end. That's kind of cool.
That is cool. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the endings are nice because then you had like a nice episode until then.
It's true. Oh.
It's kind of like dessert, right? It's like you've had this really nice meal, all of this good stuff. You learn something along the way, and then you have, I don't know, some cheese, and then it's done. And you're like, oh, this ending was good.
Hey, John, do you like cheese?
I like cheese. I have it on Twitter, right? It's like, it's recorded. I mean, it's not that I put it on Twitter, but it's on my Twitter.
It's on the record, so to say.
You want to say it's on the record?
On the record. Well, this is the Off the Record podcast, so nobody can count it against me, I guess. I don't know. How does that actually work?
Well, but you have it on Twitter that you love cheese.
Wow. Yeah. I don't know how that got there. It's so weird.
You remember the strange cheese we had at the cheese masterclass thing that we did a couple of years back? The Belpa Knolle? I have it now. It's amazing.
Wow. Okay.
I finally found a place that sells it nearby. So that's pretty cool. And actually, it's literally across the street. So I didn't expect it to, that's really nice.
So you like cheese?
I do like cheese.
After that masterclass, I got, what's it called?
The blue cheese?
It also won some award. Jersey blue.
Yeah.
The blue cheese. And it's so amazing. And you can deep fry it, and then it's even more amazing.
What? You deep fry cheese?
Yeah, you bread it, and then you deep fry it. It's amazing. I'm telling you, it's amazing. You hit it with some pepper. It's fantastic.
We should have a cheese podcast. This seems to be bringing your attention in quite well.
It is relevant.
Well, it's cooking.
Cooking. So talking about cooking, it's like, should we have more guests?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. What do you guys think about getting someone external on the podcast as well, not just like internal folks?
I have candidates.
No.
Ooh. Would you mind spilling the beans or nah? Surprise.
I mean, I know a bunch of people I really, really like to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
Not you, Martin. Sorry. And I meant external people. And I would love to chat with them again on a podcast. Like, for example, I don't know, Aleida Solis, for example. I forgot her company's name, but she's one of the most prominent SEOs externally, I think. Jennifer Slag, she's brilliant. And our interviews at those in-person conferences were one of the few ones where I was actually sweating on stage because the questions were so hard to get out of. Eric Enge, I really like talking to him. Very smart guy.
Eric is great.
Mark Trophagen, super interesting dude. Yeah, I have a long list.
Nice.
Okay. That sounds pretty interesting. Or should we add more people internally as well?
No.
Like from different parts of Google? Or
yeah.
like, how do you see it?
I would love to have David Price, one of our lawyers or legal counsel. I don't know, like what's the proper term on the podcast, because I'm pretty sure he sees interesting things happening. No?
Okay.
That he can't talk about.
I mean, he can talk about a few things, I'm sure. And I'm pretty sure that the things that he can talk about is probably interesting.
Okay. Or like we could add someone or invite someone who's more local, someone like Aurora, perhaps.
Yeah.
From I don't know, she's on the trust and safety team, I think, right?
I think it is. I think it's ads policies or publisher policies or something, right?
Yeah. I mean, she's been doing the Sustainable Monetized Website series on her channel, which is pretty cool. So it's almost like maybe we should figure that out first.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she's in reach. We had Maria already. Who else is local?
Yeah.
Someone from the assistant team, maybe?
I don't know. Is like voice search still a thing? People haven't been asking me about it anymore for a while now.
What's voice search?
Oh, that's a surprise.
Do you search with voice?
Nah.
No?
No.
I mean, like now that you're in a room by yourself, you can talk to your phone and you don't get any awkward looks, right? So is it easier?
Nah.
Nah?
I'm a fast typer. I type.
Okay.
I mean, I'm a developer. What do you expect me to say? Like, I type quickly, and it comes natural to me at this point.
Okay. You're like a machine interface, Martin.
I'm like a statically typed machine.
Oh my gosh. Gary, what about you? Do you ever do voice searches?
The short answer is no. The long answer is that I tried and still no. I don't have voice enabled. Like, for example, on my phone, I disable Siri right away as soon as I set up the phone. I just disable it. On the TV, I think it's the Google Assistant that's enabled, and I couldn't figure out how to turn it off. Alas, I haven't spent all that much time trying. But the few things I tried didn't work out all too well, probably because of my accent, perhaps.
You, an accent? No.
But your German is so great.
Yeah, about that. Did you know that the Google Assistant doesn't necessarily like Swiss German?
I can imagine that as like, who really likes Swiss German?
Oh, it's a beautiful language. Come on.
I love Swiss German. I love Swiss German way more than Hochdeutsch, like High German.
Okay.
Swiss German is so...
melodious.
Yeah.
But could you imagine if more people started searching by voice and all the people in Switzerland started using Swiss German? Like how that would change the SEO world?
Aren't there like 40 different sub-dialects in Swiss German? Because I think like every village speaks slightly varied.
So you'd have to set up hreflang for all of those, right?
What?
Could you imagine?
But yeah, try to imagine, like even if you go down to Bern, for example, like understanding their Swiss German is tough, to say the least.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Versus the Zürcher one.
More.
Or you go down to Graubünden, for example, and try to understand that when you are coming from Berlin or Hamburg or whatever. It's tough, even for locals and German speakers. Let's not talk about, like, what if you go up on top of a mountain and you find a shepherd, for example, and you try to talk to that person, you will fail. Like, even if you are born in Zurich.
Okay. So you're saying like voice search in the mountains is a bad idea?
I mean, you have 4G reception in Switzerland on the mountains, so you could try.
Sure, but it's the mountains, so you have echo.
I think we have
That's
echo
okay.
canceling. That should be okay.
Yeah.
On this episode of Swiss Languages.
Yeah, we should switch more to kind of the web again. Maybe invite some web workers. What do you think?
Did you just...
Yes, he did. Oh my. Yeah, this is a fun one. Back in 2018, when I joined, I did a bunch of tests around our JavaScript capabilities. And One of the things that I tested was web workers. And web workers are basically just a way to have like multi-threaded code on the web and offload some stuff from the main thread. I'll explain all of these lovely words in a moment. I see big eyes here. And I noticed that in rendering, web workers don't really work the way that you would expect them to work. And that's normally fine because very few people are using them, and even fewer people are using them for content-related things. But Giacomo Cecchini, I hope I didn't butcher your name, Giacomo, if you're listening to this, recently tweeted out that specific question. Like, since 2018, no one has caught up on this. Like, no one has noticed that behavior. And he ran a few tests, apparently, and he noticed that the behavior is different from what you would expect and asked me a question about it. And I'm like, oh, here we go. This is interesting. Because I talked to the rendering team, and the rendering team is like, yeah, but is anyone really using it for anything where Googlebot would need to run the web worker properly? And I'm like, I don't think so. But I would love to hear from the community if they have considered using web workers and then not done it because they wanted to do something that involves the content and they found out that it doesn't work super well in rendering. Because I wonder if it really is a problem. I don't know, to be honest.
So I guess web workers is something you would do more on an interactive level? Like you click a button and it does some fancy calculation and then brings the results back?
Yeah, that's pretty much the traditional use, where the problem or the challenge on the web is that JavaScript is a single thread of execution. So if you have like a website with lots of cool things on it and then a button that does some long-running task, whatever that is. It could be some sort of calculation that just takes a long time, for instance, or it needs to do something on the network. Network is kind of fine because that kind of happens in the background naturally. But when you do calculations, that kind of is running on the same process or on the same thread of execution, if you want to, with everything else that happens on the page when you interact with it. So scrolling, the code that runs the calculations, any buttons, any link clicks, anything that happens on the page is kind of blocked once this long-running task starts. So if you are having some very heavy calculation, like, I don't know, you have an input box and you can type in, give me the 100th prime number. Prime number calculations take a while. So if you click that, it might take 10 seconds to get to the 100th prime number. During these 10 seconds, you can't click on anything, you can't scroll the page, you can't do anything on the page. That's a challenge.
So why would you do this with a web worker and not just send it to the server and have the server do the calculation? Because it's like a big server with lots of CPU.
That is true, but sometimes you might not want to do that, or sometimes you might have to make it work offline as well, which we can do now thanks to a specific kind of web worker called the service worker. If you can push it to the server, by all means do, because that's the easiest thing you can potentially do. But if you can't, because you can't rely on the server to be there, on the server to be available, on the network to be available, on the network to be fast, or if it's just like a lot of data needs to go into the calculation, then uploading the data to the server can take really, really long. Let's say you want to do some sort of image processing, right? There's like Squoosh.app where you can upload an image and it doesn't really upload it to the server. It keeps it in your browser locally. And then you can try out different image encodings and compare them. If you were doing that with a server, you would have to have a pretty powerful server to do that for all the users that you may have on the application at the same time. And the other thing is you need to upload the image and then download the image. And images are big, usually, right? So it's nice to do that on your device so that the network does not really play a role here. But again, image data conversion takes a while. So instead of running this conversion on the same thread, blocking the app and making it unresponsive for a couple of seconds, they are doing it in the background with a web worker.
Okay, cool. And a service worker is essentially the same thing? Or is it like, how does that fit in? That's like a PWA thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A service worker is basically a very specific kind of web worker. So web workers are just scripts that can run in a separate environment, basically as if they were running on a separate computer, kind of, inside the browser, but they only run when the website that starts them is actually active. Whereas the service worker is the same thing. It is also a script that runs in its own environment, but it can be triggered by the browser in certain conditions. So for instance, whenever the website makes a network request, the service worker is triggered and asks what should happen with that. Another thing is if your phone receives a push notification and the service worker has subscribed to them, then the service worker would be woken up to process this push notification. So it is a specific kind of web worker, but it uses the same mechanisms as web workers.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the network request side, that kind of makes sense because that way you could make it so that it kind of works offline and that it caches a lot of these things, right? Mm-hmm. I guess that's where it fits into the PWA side of things.
Yeah. Because it allows us to be like offline capable and push notifications and background fetches and all that kind of cool stuff.
And where would this come into play with like pages for indexing? Like if I imagine most of these web workers would be kind of like these interactive things where, like you mentioned, the Squish app, where you upload an image and then it does some processing and brings the results back. How might it play in with normal indexing? Because you probably, I guess that would be something that would have to work while the page is initially loading, or?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And the one thing I learned in my career as a developer and now as a developer advocate is that developers' creativity is infinite. So people come up with fantastic uses of technology that you do not anticipate. So, for instance, you could use web workers to basically your server would give us a skeleton and placeholder version of the content that kind of just takes up space. And then the web worker would do some whatever heavy lifting needs to be done in the background with like lots of API calls and stuff happening. And then eventually once it has the content already, it passes it over to the main thread. That's one way of reducing main thread work. And I think it's one of the things that does come up for time to interact or first input delay, which might become more important because of the core web vitals. But as I said, like I can only guess what developers out there have built. I could imagine things like, oh, the content is somehow encrypted and needs to be decrypted on the client's device or something like that. But then I would say like, yeah, but if the key has to be sent to the client, why encrypt in the first place? Nonetheless, I've seen people do this kind of stuff where crypto was kind of just like the black magic that they needed to keep people calm. I'm intrigued. I would actually really like to hear out there if people are struggling with this, if people for SEO reasons had to not use web workers for something, and if so, what that was. Because I'm just intrigued what kind of creativity is out there that might need our help.
I guess it's tricky to recognize. If we ignore it for rendering, then we don't really have a log of people who are trying to do it.
That's true. Yeah.
Cool. I guess you could just write your content in Swissdrum and then you wouldn't have to encrypt it and decrypt it. It's like the simple solution is like, why do all of this magic JavaScript? It's so complicated.
True. Yeah.
That's true.
Why JavaScript? Why?
Because JavaScript. That's why.
Does any of this play in with like promises? That's like another one of those JavaScript constructs where it's like you wait for something to be finished. Is that like a connection to these web workers, or is that totally unrelated?
It's somewhat related because both of it are ways of tackling asynchronous code. So normally code is synchronous. So you say like instruction 1 and then instruction 2 and then instruction 3. And maybe if some condition is met, we do instruction 2 and 3 again until it's not met. Then we do instruction 4 and 5, whatever. With JavaScript, the way it works is that with a lot of stuff, you are kind of basically scheduling a task, and that task is eventually run when there's space available to run that task. So, for instance, a click isn't immediately executed. If I have like an on-click handler for a button that doesn't run synchronously, so it's not that my code stops until the button is clicked and then it does something. It basically says like, when the button is clicked, run this function. So what happens in the browser? The button is clicked and the browser goes like, okay, so I'll add the code that is on this on-click handler to a queue where all the scrolling, all the other clicking is happening as well. And then eventually the time has come to run that code for the on-click handler. So that's asynchronous. And then there's different ways of doing this. There's promises where you say like, hey, when that happens, run this code. There's also callbacks. It's another way of saying, hey, when that happens, run this code. But all of this still happens in the same thread. So the same, like all this is sharing the same execution environment, the same processor if you want. Whereas a web worker that is a completely separate environment that is completely detached from the rest of the code. And it communicates with your main thread, with the main line of execution through messages. So you send messages to and from. So it's somewhat related, but it's not the same thing.
Okay.
Promises run in the same environment. Workers run in a separate environment.
Okay. So it's like with JavaScript, you're always waiting for things. I got it.
Mm-hmm.
How does WASM fit in here? That's something I heard with Squoosh. Like they made this with WASM, apparently.
Yeah.
What's WASM?
So WASM is the short version of Webassembly. Oh. And Webassembly is an interesting project, and it kind of ties into web workers as well, because the idea there is with JavaScript, you write JavaScript, which is human readable, at least developer readable, let's say. So this text then needs to be translated into machine readable instructions. And then these machine readable instructions are being executed. That's great for normal amounts of JavaScript, but for a bunch of stuff, it would be cool to kind of have like a way to skip this first part, to have the human written code and the human readable code translated straight into this machine readable format and then executed. And that's what WebAssembly is. That's where it came from. The original idea was, hey, we can actually speed things up by skipping the first part or making it as quick as possible. So browsers have now implemented a way to basically give us a pre-interpreted, a pre-translated version of the human readable JavaScript. It's a machine readable version of that. And then that can execute faster. And that brought us a really, really cool thing, which is the idea of taking something that is in a programming language that traditionally does not run on the web, like C++ or C code or Rust code, and then basically make it into this machine readable JavaScript form and then run that. And that's exactly what Squoosh did. So for instance, the code to transform an image into JPEG, that is C code normally that you would run on your machine. It doesn't really run in the browser. So they made a WebAssembly version of it. And in order to not have the website block entirely, because if you have like an image that's say like 4096 by 4096 pixels, that's a whole lot of pixels. It sounds large, but it actually isn't. Or actually make a different example. If you look at a full screen image for a 1080p screen, then we have, and I'm actually typing this into a calculator because my math isn't that great, we have to process 2 million pixels. Each pixel being at least 3 bytes large. That's a lot of data that you need to process. And that would mean that if I would do that in a WebAssembly or JavaScript environment just as part of the page, it would take a few, maybe like 2 seconds, but in these 2 seconds, it wouldn't respond to any scrolls, any clicks, anything that I do with the page. So they are running their WebAssembly in a web worker. So they basically say like, hi, here is the data. Here are the, 3 megabytes of image data that we have, or 2 megabytes of image data that we have. Please make that into a JPEG. And then they throw that over, and the website is now available to like respond to clicks and everything. The web worker does the work, does the WebAssembly execution for the C code that has been compiled into WebAssembly to actually make it JPEG data. And then it sends that JPEG data back, and then we can display that in the image tag. Ta-da.
Wow. Okay.
It all fits together.
Seems like a lot of work. And you're saying like web workers currently don't work for rendering?
They kind of do. I mean, we execute them and we register them. It's just that because they are in a different environment, we are not very good at picking up the events that happen in them. So for instance, if you have a web worker that gets sent a message and then immediately responds back, that works generally. But if you have a web worker that fetches something from the network, then we don't really wait for the web worker to actually get the network response and send the response back to the main thread. So you see really funny things happening in web workers when you execute them in rendering. Yeah.
So what about promises and WASM? Do they work? Like if you have them in your normal thread?
They do work. Yeah. I think we are waiting for the task queue to be empty, and promises add something to the task queue of the main thread. And so as long as it happens in the main thread, you'll be fine.
So cool. Okay.
Well, I didn't understand anything out of that.
What? Come on. That can't be true.
It's JavaScript, Gary. It's the language of the future. Apart from Swiss German.
I don't like the future.
Oh. Swiss German is the encryption of the future.
I think someone should make a programming language using Swiss German commands. I think that would be super cool.
Do you remember the time when someone had this brilliant idea that, I don't remember which programming language should have German instructions?
Oh, that's the VB script, Visual Basic Script?
Yeah.
That was like that as well, right?
Yeah.
Or was that just like in Excel or something? Like if you ran it there?
I think it was VB script. And that went well. All right.
Well, I mean, the thing that always annoyed me there is you could never like copy an example from somewhere on the web and just make it work because you had to translate all of the commands as well. But I'm thinking of a programming language that is Swiss German by default and doesn't have local versions.
Interesting. I know that there was this "if PHP were British" article once that was pretty hilarious. Instead of like if else, it's perchance and otherwise, I think. And instead of switch, it's what about.
Yeah.
And try catch becomes would you mind, and actually I do mind, and it's hilarious.
Okay. See, something like that, just with Swiss German. I think that would be perfect.
Yeah.
It's like all of these computer people that just speak English, and it's like they should see what it's like to actually have to learn something new again.
Oh, wonderful.
I was writing some C++ code internally, and I wanted an example for something very specific, and I found this blog on the internet which had, well, it promised that I would find the example there, but it looked like someone ran perhaps Grammarly or something like that on the code as well. So a bunch of things were corrected, like, I don't even know, like the if statements, for example, they were expanded to sound more human-like. Like the parentheses, for example, were dropped, and then if whatever, blah, 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 this, then it was like, this, what?
Yeah. I just noticed that sometimes when you have quotes in code,
Oh, yeah.
depending on how people put the code samples together, it'll be like those weird smart quotes, and you copy and paste it and nothing works. It's like,
And then your compiler is like, nope, 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 nope.
I have never seen this symbol before in my life. And it's like, come on. It's like,
It's a quote. It's a quote. Too smart for me. Sorry.
if only there were universal compilers.
Double quotes or single quotes?
Yeah, that's confusing too. It's like in some programming languages, they're the same, and in others, they're not the same. It's like, why can't they make up their mind?
Oh.
What is it?
Shell script. I love shell script for that reason.
Oh.
It's like, you used a double quote here. I can't interpret whatever you put inside the double quote. Okay, here's a single quote. Okay, now I will execute it. But you put this other character inside, which you forgot to escape. Put it in double quotes. Huh?
Yeah, if only the error messages were that clear. Usually it's just like, oh, deleted all your files.
Yeah, that's fair. So in the previous episodes, we were talking about serving, and I think we are finished with ranking things more or less. There is one interesting thing in most search engines, which is universal search. It's not Google specific, other search engines do it as well. And because most search engines rank results roughly the same way with different flavors, this is applicable probably to every search engine that I can think of. So during the ranking process, we assigned a score to every result that we retrieved from our index. We talked about the web index, but the reality is that when we created our rewritten query, the parsed query, then we sent that to every index that we have. So for example, if we have an index for images, if we have an index for videos, if we have an index for news and so on, they would also get that parsed query. And then they would do the same thing that we explained in case of the web index, which is basically console posting list, for example, and then based on that retrieve some documents that is then ranked or assigned a score. Now, once they found stuff, then they will return that to something called, let's make up a name, Blender or Mixer. I don't know, something, universal mixer. And that will take all the results that came up from all the different indexes and try to mix them together. So the reality is that the result page is actually very similar to an auction hall, where results are actually bidding for their desired positions. So for example, the featured snippet might want the first position. So it will submit a score that I can bid this much for this position. It can also say that I don't want second position or third position or fourth position or so on. I only want the first position. And then we look at the web results, for instance, and I'm gesticulating with my hand again, even though I'm on a podcast. I don't know why I do that. I always do that. So we have the feature snippet, which bid, let's say 1,000 for the first position. Then we have the first or the next web result, which has a score of 1,500, let's say. Then that means that that web result outbid the featured snippet. But because the feature snippet said that I can bid 1,000 and 1,000 only, and I only want the first position, it will just fall out the result set because it didn't want the second place. It bid for the first place and first place only. The next web results that have scores assigned to them, they will naturally follow. Another thing that happens in Universal Mixer is that, as I said, we take the results from the other indexes and then we will try to mix them into the result set. Now we have preferred positions for some things, like for example, the video results, they are just highlighted by assigning a thumbnail nowadays to the web result where the video is found in. Let's say johnmuller.com will get a video because John will put up a video of how to make fondue, for example. And then the way that's highlighted is by assigning the screenshot or thumbnail from the video to the web result. But in case of images, we actually get a universal result, which is nowadays is more like a carousel, I think, especially on mobile, where you can scroll horizontally through the images, I think. That might not be completely true. I use my own search engine. I developed one yesterday. It's called Steve. Anyway, so we have preferred positions for those, and we will try to match them into the, or among the web results. What else do we have there? Then we have certain search features that always appear roughly at the bottom of search result page. Like, for example, the related searches, which is a feature that also gets the parsed query or the interpreted query. And then based on that, it will return a set of queries that are related to the original query in some sense. But that feature doesn't want to take up space in the browsing area or where you would expect the search results. So it's usually positioned at the bottom. What else do we have? News.
So the related searches on the bottom, I guess, would need to bid something really low, or would they kind of also say, like, my preferred position is 10 or whatever?
I think it's more like that. Like, my preferred position is this, and I can bid this much for that. Perhaps related searches is not a great example because you are not competing for a spot. Like, it's not like you are taking up the space of a result, but it's more like you are extending the search result page with a new visual element. Perhaps it's more similar to knowledge panel, I guess.
Okay. So it's almost like all of these different indexes or kind of content have their own search engine. And basically they're saying, it's like, my result is like super relevant or kind of relevant. And then there's like a super search engine on top of all of these search engines that mixes them all together?
Technically, yes. I mean, many of our systems are shared. Like, for example, Googlebot is not used only for web crawling. It's used for fetching ads landing pages as well. It's using a different user agent for when it's doing some other job, but it's still a shared system. It's used by many teams. And the same way, the retrieval systems might be used for different things as well. So, for example, if I need a featured snippet, for example, then I can technically use the same retrieval system that we use for retrieving web results.
Okay.
Because essentially it's doing the same thing, but perhaps differently. Like something has to be different about it. And these systems, or many of these systems, but especially the retrieval system, is modular enough that you can just plug in your own module that you wrote for ranking stuff differently. Like, for example, with images, you have to rank the landing pages slightly differently because you are focusing on the image, not the landing page itself necessarily.
Okay. So cool. And like, how do we recognize if we should show images or videos or that? Is it just like video search saying it's like, oh, it's like this cat video, you have to see this cat video?
Right. That's a fantastic question. We learn it. So like when you search for something that normally doesn't have images or videos, and you tap the images tab on the result page, then you are essentially teaching Google that there was this random person who wanted images for this particular query. And if there are enough users doing that, then you are essentially teaching Google that that query might deserve images or videos or whatever.
So cool. So cool. And you mentioned they can bid for individual positions. How do those positions map to things like Search Console?
Webmaster Tools.
Webmaster Tools, yeah.
So every position has a number assigned to it. Like, for example, we have position 1, 0, whatever. And it doesn't matter all that much what we put in that position, right? We can just say that there was something in that position. Usually when we log, I imagine that you are talking about impressions and clicks. I haven't been to Search Console for a long time. So I imagine...
No.
I only use Steve Console. Anyway, so since you're talking about impressions and clicks, we can record that there was, like, this was the query that is obvious. And then there was an impression at this position. Basically, you showed up at this position. We don't necessarily have to say what you showed up with. Like, for example, you could have been in a featured snippet, which is just an expanded result, essentially, with smarter snippeting, I guess. But it was just a result. And then we record that impression happened at this web result position. And then when someone taps on it, then we can just say that at that web result, there was a tap on or click for this page, for this query. And then we aggregate all that and present it in Search Console.
Okay. So here's a controversial question.
Oh, I'm glad that you found me for this.
Okay. So featured snippets, you mentioned them a few times. Mm-hmm. Externally, people say this is ranking at position 0.
Okay.
Is it 0?
I don't know. Never looked it up. I mean, if you ask a developer, then whoever worked with arrays, for example, then it will be 0.
It will be 0. But like if you have a normal web result as the first one, is that also 0?
No, that's 1. Unless you're a developer, because then it's 0. Because it's an array.
Okay.
Am I confusing enough? Okay, so the non-funny answer is that I actually have no idea what position that would be. I could probably look it up, but I really don't want to.
Okay, but it's like the general notion that is sometimes seen externally of like if your web result ranks first, that's position 1, but if you have a featured snippet, that's position 0. That doesn't make that much sense, or it might make sense? It's like...
Well, if you want my interpretation, then I think it doesn't make sense.
Okay.
Externally, I did say position 0 a few times just to use the same language as SEOs.
Oh, it comes from you.
What? No. Why would you say that?
This is how rumors are started.
Well, it's a good thing that we are off the record. But I would argue that it is a position 1, not a position 0.
Okay. Yeah, I also noticed, like, depending on the programming languages, they also have this either 0 or 1 for the first item in the arrays. So it's like super confusing. Like, someone should figure that out. It's like all of these off by 1 errors. I bet it's like lots of things break.
Do they though?
Do they? I don't know. I mean, everything that has software in it breaks. I think that's part of the universal law.
It's not a bug, it's a random feature.
It's like a fun surprise waiting for you to be discovered. Okay.
That's one way to kill a discussion. Just bring up arrays.
Just bring up arrays. No. Okay. Fine.
Would you prefer linked lists, Gary?
Oh, God.
How about some graphs?
Graphs I actually don't mind. I actually like working with graphs.
Cool.
Unless they're represented as an adjacency matrix, I don't like that representation too much, to be honest.
Okay. This is getting like way too complicated, technical for me.
But if we keep going on for 1 more minute and 45 seconds, then we pass the 1 hour recording.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
You should see our producer face palming very, very hard in the background right now.
Well, luckily, this is a podcast. Nobody can see anything. So we're all safe. Woohoo!
It's true. That's why I'm saying it. We're off the record after all.
We're all off the record. Cool. All right.
I'm sure there will be 0 cuts. We'll just upload this uncut straight to the internet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, then there's nothing left for me to say other than that's it for this episode of the Search Off the Record podcast. We've been having fun with these podcast episodes, and I hope you, the listener, have been finding them both entertaining and insightful as well. And at any rate, let us know if there's anything that you'd like to have covered differently, if you'd like to have some web workers featured as guests along the way, or if there are other topics that we should be covering as well. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you all next time. Bye.
Wieder Lurke.
Tschüssli.